Good evening and welcome to the public hearing in the 2024-25 budget. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few ground rules for this meeting. This is a public hearing on the superintendent's recommended budget. All public comments should be related to this budget. Any other public comment should be kept until next regular board meeting. Each member of the public wishing to speak may address the board for a total of 3 minutes. At the 2-minute mark, the bell will ring, letting you know that you have 1 minute left to wrap up. At the second bell, your 3 minutes are up. We have a lot of speakers tonight. Please be respectful of others' time. And if you run out of time, you may submit your comments in writing to Ms. Santiago. No boisterous conduct shall be permitted. Time limits will be strictly enforced. No personal contacts on individuals. No vulgar or indecent language. No signs are allowed inside the board meeting. Speakers may not yield their time to another speaker. A speaker must refrain from naming employees. A person may address the board no more than twice during a single meeting. This is a difficult budget season, and we encourage your input, but please be respectful. Now this will be read in Spanish.
Buenas noches y bienvenidos. Primero que nada, si alguien en la audiencia necesita interpretación al español, por favor levante la mano y la intérprete le ayudará en este momento. Bienvenidos a la audiencia pública del presupuesto recomendado del año 2024-25. Antes de comenzar, queremos establecer las reglas para esta reunión. Esta es una audiencia pública del presupuesto recomendado por la superintendente. Todos los comentarios de hoy deben estar relacionados a este presupuesto. Cualquier otro comentario debe esperar hasta la próxima reunión regular de la Junta. Cada miembro del público que quiera hablar puede dirigirse a la Junta por un total de 3 minutos. Al final de 2 minutos, el timbre sonará para dejarle saber que le queda 1 minuto para concluir. Cuando suene el timbre por segunda ocasión, significa que se acabaron sus 3 minutos. Tenemos muchas personas que quieren hablar esta noche, así que por favor, seamos respetuosos del tiempo de los demás. Si no le da tiempo, puede entregar sus comentarios por escrito. No se permite conducta ruidosa. El tiempo límite será aplicado estrictamente. No se permiten ataques personales contra individuos. No se permite lenguaje vulgar o soez. No se permiten letreros dentro del salón de la reunión de la Junta. Una persona no puede cederle su tiempo disponible a otra persona. No se deben mencionar empleados por nombre. Una persona no puede dirigirse a la Junta en más de 2 ocasiones durante una misma reunión. Este es un periodo de presupuesto difícil y queremos escuchar sus observaciones, pero por favor, mantengamos el respeto.
Thank you. Before we start with public comments, I do want to give the superintendent some time to go over a few slides with you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and those offering public comment, and to all of our board members, those that are tuning in. This is another important step in what has been a comprehensive budget development process. It is worth noting that this process started about 6 months ago, back in October. We have forecasted for about 4 years now that, this would be an exceptionally challenging year. So we wanted to start the budget development process earlier and in the most transparent way possible. We have prioritized community feedback and engagement across multiple touch points. And there has been a process inclusive of our schools, our school governance council members, as well as meetings with our union leadership and central office to ensure that, there's collective understanding of investments moving forward. So I'm going to go through a few slides that we've shared with community members, staff, and even this board, just to kind of orient everyone to the budget for this year, what that means for staffing and where we currently are. So in this first slide here, it's a high-level overview of our budget in comparison to last year and how we have sought to balance the budget. And some of the assumptions in the budget include a projected revenue right? That's the money that's coming in of $429 million and proposed expenditures, money going out, of $467 million. So there is mitigation that is needed to bridge that gap. And as we've said before, our revenue is essentially flat since 2020, with modest increases from the state and flat funding from the city, while our costs have predictably gone up at an increased rate. Our schools will see funding that is consistent with the level of the equity-based starter budget, which was developed several years ago. However, for the vast majority of our schools, funding that is consistent with the level of the equity-based starter budget will reflect a significant reduction from what they have had for several years, largely because of the added ESSER, right, pandemic relief funding. The budget also includes large reductions to central office and district services other than just in schools. Ultimately, the budget reflects a large percentage reduction in funding and in staffing for central office and schools. This is a more detailed view of the revenue breakout. On the left is our total revenue broken out by source, including our ECS, our education cost share, and other state funds. City funding paid for by city taxpayers, federal and private or other, with a large chunk, you see there pulled out in red, approximately 51 million, represents ESSER. And that 51 million represents the pandemic relief funds that were budgeted for use this current year in the form both in positions and non-position expenses. And with ESSER, now it's nearly exhausted. We're almost done using those funds, and the deadline is, right around the corner, right at the end of September. That red slice obviously doesn't carry over into fiscal year 2025, which is why the other donut right to the right doesn't have the red. So even though the chart on the right shows a large share of money coming in from ECS, the total amount of funding is smaller by about $40 million. So the big takeaway is that non-ESSER funding has been essentially flat, despite a modest increase from the state and in spite of rising costs. So the funding from the city of Hartford, which is made up of Hartford taxpayer dollars and is shown on the graph with the royal blue piece, has been flat funded at about $96 million. This flat funding has been consistent for 10 years, even while the state has increased the ECS funding. And I know that we've had this conversation before. You may have heard people suggest that flat funding is really an increase because our enrollment has declined. And while our enrollment has decreased, the flat revenues have not kept the pace with the cost of meeting the needs of all of our students. So across all revenue sources, and after a modest adjustment of 2% per year for inflation, for Hartford Public Schools to have the same amount of money per student in our schools next year as we had the year before the pandemic hit, right? We would need an additional $19 million. So just to say that again, right? Our funding for next year is $19 million short of what we would need to spend the same amount per pupil as we did back in 2019, 2020, right, to serve our students in Hartford Public Schools. This next slide is our proposed allocation of resources or expenses in our budget. On the left side, it shows the allocation of over $508 million, which includes the ESSER, 36% in equity-based starter budgets, 18% in school funding allocated centrally, 27% in fixed expenses like tuition, transportation, 15% in central services and supports provided in schools, and about 4% in administration. On the right side, that shows the change after proposed reductions. The percent allocation of fixed expenses has increased to almost 33%, and school funding allocated centrally increased to almost 20%, with a modest actual increase. And this, by the way, includes the increase in positions necessary to meet the needs of our special education students. Allocations throughout the equity-based starter budgets did decrease to 32% of the overall, largely because of the increase in tuition. Central office expenditures also see a reduction in percent in all three categories. And the headline here, the takeaway here is for that the percent that we need to allocate to those fixed expenses has only gone up. And that needs to be taken from, it needs to be taken from all areas, including those in direct services to schools. And just another point that is important here is since that 2019-2020 school year, tuition has grown by almost 200% to over $120 million, while our revenue has remained essentially unchanged. So we have more obligations that are outside of our district and the same amount of money, which means that the services that we're able to provide will be impacted. This is, the next slide is a high-level balance sheet, which includes the reductions that I just spoke about over the last two slides, right? So even that, even with the fact that we have $38 million to account for, right? Still after all of that, we still have to look for $38 million for next year. But there are several mechanisms for mitigating that, including vacancy savings. We know that we always have some percentage of vacancies, and so we can use that money to close the gap. Using some of the ESSER funding, at least up until September of next year. We're counting on the general education tuition cap that was agreed to by the state legislature, and using the non-lapsing fund. Even that, right, we see that there is still a $5.7 million gap. And lastly, this is a summarized look at those reductions and staffing levels for central office, including those areas to directly support or service schools, as well as school-based funding. So 67.1 reductions at central office, which equals to 16.5% of central office positions. This includes the reduction of 3 chief-level positions, several positions from both finance and the Office of Talent, a significant number of coach positions from teaching and learning, most of which were funded by ESSER dollars, and were always considered to be temporary, right? Given that that grant we knew was going to expire. We also see 387.5 total positions across our schools, which means 11.2% of our school-based positions. The biggest drop here is in resource teachers, which, similar to the coaches, were also funded by ESSER. There's a reduction of classroom teaching positions, but also we are adhering to the classroom size limitations as per all of our bargaining agreements. The final example I would share from school-based positions would be a reduction in classroom paraeducators, but we're increasing the number of special education paraeducators. And so I know that there is, like I mentioned, the $5.7 million that is still needs to be mitigated. Chairman did request for us to go back and seek to close that, and so we don't have that at this point, but we are having those conversations moving forward, and just want to make sure that I clarify that the reductions will not be from our schools, right? That the request was to examine the reductions across central office. I will end by saying that this is a very unfortunate reality that requires reductions across the board. I know that all schools have felt these reductions, proposed reductions. I know that that is not a position that any one of us wants to be in. The size and the proportion of the reductions across schools will vary for different reasons. One is that projected student need will change, and that will largely determine the district allocation of school funds for staff like our special education teachers, our paraeducators, TESOL, bilingual teachers. The second reason is that while the equity-based starter budget provided the foundation for allocating funding, some schools were staffed at levels higher than the equity-based budget in certain areas. And to ensure equity across the buildings, and without the luxury of having that infusion of that $150 million in COVID relief fund, we have had to adhere to the equity-based budget model. And so because some schools were budgeted at those higher levels in certain areas previously, the return to funding every school at the level of that equity-based starter budget means the reductions are a larger percent of the total in some schools compared to others. That said, I want to emphasize that every school received a school-based allocation based on that equity-based starter budget formula. As a final reminder, this reflects budgeted positions and not filled positions. It remains to be determined how many of these reductions can actually be achieved through vacant positions. I think right now we're at about 140, if I remember correctly, vacancies. We also have retirements, we have resignations. So there's still work that has to happen before we can determine exactly how many of these reductions will be achieved through those opportunities that we have. For those that want more information about staffing across the district, I recommend that you watch the board budget workshop from last week, or review the budget presentation, which is also available on our website. For those who want to have more information about their specific school, feel free to contact your school principal. Lastly, I recommend, I know that there's the city's public hearing on their budget, which is also tomorrow, and so I know that they're also having conversations. So again, recommending and encouraging our community to review what we have presented and then stay abreast with all the other budget-related conversations happening at the city as well. Chairman, that concludes my comments.
Thank you. I do want to remind folks again that this is a public hearing, and we will conduct ourselves in a similar fashion to public comments at regular board meetings. But I do want to note that, as the superintendent alluded to, there were workshops for the board and board members to review the deck and information that she provided and also pose questions. Tonight, we're also going to hear more feedback from the community, and there'll be another community of the whole meeting, I believe, next week, April 10th, where board members will be able to ask and pose additional questions. So with that being said, Mr. Santiago, we could begin public comments.
Our first speaker is Marama Pramanik.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. I am the parent of an 11th grader at Hartford Magnet Trinity College Academy and a member of the School Governance Council. We are a suburban family that tried for years to win the lottery to attend Hartford Public Schools and were overjoyed when we were finally able to. Our daughter travels half an hour from home twice a day because of the unique opportunities afforded by attending a magnet school. We love the intentional community that results in a diverse, driven, and inclusive space for learning. There's a program called What 3 Words that was created so that exact locations all over the world could easily and accurately be found in case of an emergency. The world was divided into 3-meter squares, and each square was assigned a random, unique combination of 3 words. If I could choose the 3 words that would lead people to the door of HMTCA, I would choose inclusive, challenging, and empowering. Unfortunately, with the budget that has been proposed for the next year, I'm not sure how long our amazing school will even be around. The budget that has been proposed for the 2024-2025 school year disproportionately affects our school, the school with the largest student body in the district. We will lose at least 19 certified staff and over 13 non-certified staff. Unlike other high schools in the district, we do not have a fancy esports lab, a broadcasting or television studio, a robotics program, an engineering lab, or even a theater program. What we do have is a unique partnership with Trinity College that affords access to high-quality college classes and programming right across the street from our school. I fear that with the budget cuts, not only are we losing much-needed staff and resources, but access to this valuable program. There is not one single solution to the budget problems that Hartford Public Schools is facing, but having certain schools bear the brunt of the pain is not equitable or sustainable. I hope that we can work together to make changes to the budget that will allow our school and its 919 students to continue to grow and thrive. And if you're curious, the 3 words to find our school are actually spend, repay, and sports. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Cindy McFarlane.
Good evening. I'm Cindy McFarlane. I'm a parent, a PTO representative, as well as an SGC representative for Hartford Magnet Trinity College Academy. As parents, we care about our kids, their future, and the education they are getting. I've always felt proud to tell others that my kids attended a magnet school in Hartford. We live in East Hartford. Neighbors on my street had sent their kids as well, and that helped reinforce our decision to send them into the city. The opportunity to take college classes and interact with other cultures and traditions through a diverse student body was a huge draw for us. We now question that decision. Every year for the last 8, I have watched our magnet school theme become more and more eroded due to loss of budget dollars and a general attitude from higher administration that magnets are the same as district schools and are treated the same. Noteworthy programs have been cut, such as theater, chorus, band, and art, and now there is threat to core courses and the foundation our kids need to be well-rounded individuals and to compete in higher education or direct employment, whatever they choose. I am concerned not only for my child, but for all of the kids in HPS. Every single one of them will be impacted by the cuts that are proposed. Our kids are talking about the cuts. They are concerned and worried. Already my daughter will have to adapt as a foreign language, which she took this year will not be offered next year, along with other classes impacting her future plans for college. Yes, not every child will go on to secondary education, but they should not be educated with a philosophy or minimal expectations to hold only a minimum wage job. They should have the opportunity to succeed in whatever they do with a great education as foundation. The budget cuts lessen that opportunity. The proposed cuts directly affect our teachers, and those remaining are overworked and stressed, impacting behavior and outlook. Our school alone is facing cuts in student engagement, family engagement, teaching and learning, social services, and support staff. The cuts are nearly 30%. How are these educators expected to do the job they love, continuing to show their dedication to our kids with so much stripped away? It is an evil cycle that is created and no end in sight. The budget process is a necessary step, but it should be approached along with a future vision. I cannot pretend to understand how the pandemic monies work, but didn't anyone think that eventually they would end and have a plan in place for when they did? I urge you to review the cuts you are asking for each school and their population, to not just go by some formula to make everything even across the district, but taking into consideration magnets and neighborhood schools as separate entities. There is a difference between the two, and each have their uniqueness to offer. We continue to hear about declining population in HPS, and magnets could be a solution if they were recognized and managed apart from the neighborhood schools. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Millie Arciniegas.
Good afternoon, Board Chairman, honorable board members, and Dr. Leslie Torres Rodriguez. My name is Millie Arciniegas, and I am the Hartford Parent University Executive Director. And, you know, I know that this is hard times, and this is hard to do after having the ESSER funds there for so long. But as I think about parent engagement and how far we have come and how far we have not come, it saddens me because I was here at a time when my kids were in the 5th grade, 2nd grade, and we decided as a district of parents to be parent-led rather than district-led. And that it was the only time that I've ever seen, back in 2007, for about 5 years, that was the only time that I seen parent engagement soar. High. Advocacy. This place was full of parents. School governance councils, people were knocking on doors to become a part of the school governance council. We didn't have to look for them. They wanted to be a part of it because it came from them. School governance council came from parents. They wanted more of a say in their children's school. I don't see that now. I see parents there confused as to why are they even sitting there. There's no parent engagement in the schools. There's no volunteerism. Back in the day, we did evaluations on how welcoming schools were to parents, only to find out that they weren't. And I look today, and it's the same way. It's the same way. So, you know, you talk about making investments, strategic investments. We're here. We're a parent-led organization working with PTOs, working with school governance councils. If you let us, right? If you let us. Because we can't even go into schools. There was a time where Hartford Public Schools granted us funding so that we can do the bottom-up approach model in your schools, in 8 schools, only to have that model not be followed after. Knowing that it worked, knowing that you have the data that shows that it worked. So I challenge you, board, to sit with us and hear us and really listen to what worked in the past that we know worked and what needs to change in the future. Because parent engagement does not start from the district. It starts from the schools. And that's where you need to invest your money. Thank you.
Ping Wong.
Hello, board members and superintendent. My name is Ping Wong, and my children attend University High School Science Engineering and Annie Fisher STEM Magnet School. I'm an active member in both PTOs at both schools. I'm on the FACES team and the North Hartford Ascend Pipeline team. I attend many United Way learning sessions and Hartford Parent University and Hartford Public Schools collaborative learning sessions to keep my parents informed. I'm here to provide a few suggestions that have been spoken recently in budget meetings to help save money. The North Hartford Ascend Pipeline team has been assembling resources for families for several months now. The village and other organizations to help provide information on dental, housing, food assistance, and daycare. We need to get the word out so parents have access to these resources that may be seeking to help themselves, family members, and other people. This will also help alleviate the FCCSP staff, behavior techs, and social workers' workload to trying to find resources for parents when they can dedicate more time to do other things that they need to take care of at hand. We need to bring the parents and guardians back into the building with parent ambassadors to help with family engagement throughout the building, as they do like in the Philadelphia School District. The parents and new parents welcome guests to the building and help direct them through this building as needed and support the school's events as requested. But they also assist the teachers in the classrooms by reading a book, sharpening pencils, walking kids from classrooms for STEAM classes, assist in the lunchroom so the teaching staff can have extra time to prep their work for that day or in the afternoon or next day. Assist the teacher in refreshing the classroom, putting away reading materials in order, math manipulatives to be ready for the next day. Communication with parents that the school supplies need donation for the classroom, such as tissues and wipes. And also assist in sorting out returned corrected homework and things. At Kinsella Magnet School, we had watchdogs comprised of dad volunteers to help cover lunchtime duty before school, greeting kids and helping with dismissal, field trips and field day, and other duties requested of them throughout the year from the principal. I think we should bring that back again. The schools are always looking for volunteers. We need to utilize our high school students within the school system to earn their volunteer hours and gain experience and knowledge and learn how to do many of the jobs in and around the school. We should ask grandparents, JCs, veterans, and retired teachers to volunteer to help us, not just on event days. Parents everywhere are asking for reasonable notifications so they can participate and help at schools. Many times it's at last minute, and it may look like parents don't want to help or participate when it was poorly communicated in the first place. Thus, Hartford Public Schools doesn't get the results you're looking for when asking for volunteers. There's a suggestion that Mr. Walker had the other night in the last meeting about how to utilize our school resources. And I have a suggestion that maybe HBS can dedicate a bus to get high school students from one school to another to learn chemistry or that class that other student was saying that was not available at their school, and vice versa. Yukon Stores Connecticut does this, and I think it would be beneficial to our students. The last part, real quick, grant writing. I think we should have more grant writing, and then we can get more funds for our school. Thank you very much.
John Walton. And as our bylaws state, a person may speak no more than twice during public comment. So Mr. Walton has asked to speak twice, and since he happens to be the last speaker, I will be putting 6 minutes on the clock.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. Good evening, distinguished board members, superintendent, faculty, the community, the viewers, those who are watching. I attended the mayor's first city address, and two things stuck out to me in that address. He asked for extended engagement in education for our students, and extended engagement and job opportunities for our students and our community members. So I'm asking this board and the superintendent to expedite and enhance and with our partners so that we can have our students and community members engaged in the two staple points that he made in this situation. We have partners lined up ready to have our students work with our facilities work program. We need to get those kids ready and be willing to work with us so that we can address some of their economic issues and address some of the engagement issues as well. So Dr. Claude Anderson, who is a famous person, and if you don't know him, you can look him up, said there's 5 staples to a thriving community. And one of the major staples to a thriving community is education. Now, I'll leave it up to my colleagues, academic colleagues, to articulate what needs to be done or how the budget affects them when it comes to academics. We have heard from our parent advocacy leaders of how the budget affects them, and they've articulated that well, and I am definitely in support of what I heard. But I am the union president of the operational components of facilities and food service. Let me start with food service. Food service has a separate federal budget. We know that because during the budget cuts, nobody was touched in food service. Also, food service has been understaffed for a long period of time. There are about, I would say, over 50 positions that haven't been filled. So that means we have saved some costs there because these positions were not filled. That indicates that because they have their own separate budget and they are not being affected by the budget cuts, that there is some areas there we need to look at. What we need to look at is this. And I'm not here to accuse anybody of anything. And Superintendent, this is not to cast a blame on you or the board members, but I'm just trying to bring awareness to you guys because some of these things work on an island of their own. And I'm trying to bring some awareness to the community. We have increased our supervision in food service with higher pay, but yet our food service members don't have uniforms. So can you imagine that? In a food service department that probably gets top funding because we're one of the larger districts, we don't have uniforms for our individual, but yet we hold them to a standard of how they should dress when they're the lowest paid individuals to begin with. And then we don't even bring them to 40 hours, but we haven't increased or created a supervisor position that has extended pay for our supervisors. Can you imagine that? So the question needs to be asked, how does that happen? Now, when we go to facilities, and many people are not going to like what I'm about to say, but let's explain the procurement process, right? When we procure things, and let's ask this question, who is benefiting from us outsourcing our facilities work? The city obviously isn't benefiting, the community isn't benefiting, and the Board of Education, Hartford Public Schools, isn't benefiting because we're in a deficit. Now, all of the deficit isn't about operations and facilities, but we have to see where we're spending too much money there because there's definitely budget issues in the facilities department. So how do we get there? Well, one of the things is we're outsourcing the jobs and the work to outside vendors. Well, now, why would we do that? Who's benefiting from that is the question this community needs to ask. Because if we're not benefiting and we're still having budget issues in that department, then there has to be some reason why we would outsource work. So let's explain the procurement process. So the procurement process is, if I'm a leader, and I'm going to use me as an example, don't quote me on this, I'm just giving you my idea of it. We're going to ask the questions and do our own investigation independently to find out if my ideas could possibly be close to the truth. I'm going to know, if I'm the leader of that department, what jobs are going to be outsourced, jobs are going to be outsourced, right? So therefore, I'm going to know the procurement process of who should get certified or how they should be certified from the city in order to be procured so that we could pick from our pool of procured vendors, right? We understand as a district and facilities that we are familiar with two parts of that three-part process. So if we know what we're going to outsource, and then we have familiar, friendly vendors who we line up for the outsourcing, potentially, then these vendors who are familiar and friendly can line themselves up, go through the procurement process, get certified, and then we pick from a pool of friendlies. And why would that happen in our district? Are we hiring people who are unaware of their rights, work rights, so that we can underdevelop our workforce to justify the outsourcing? Because we know what excuse is going to be given here. Well, I don't get complaints when the vendors do the job, and they do a better job. Well, who's responsible for that when we've had leaders in these departments? We have a new leader now, but we've had leaders in these departments for 20-something years. If the workforce can't do the work, then who's responsible for underdeveloping them, not training them? And where has been the accountability and the oversight for this? That's where millions of your dollars are going. Our dollars are going. That live here and eloquently put by the superintendent, taxpayers are footing the bill. This work should be done and filtered through our internal services between Local 566, which is your operational union in that category, and 1716, which is your Department of Public Works, keeping tax dollars internally in the city to address the problem so that futurely we don't end up here again. Thank you for your time and your patience.
And that concludes public comment.
Thank you for all the participants that came out to provide their input and their perspective. As I mentioned earlier, we appreciate the feedback. And again, as a board, we plan on meeting again next week as a committee of a whole to review, again, the superintendent's proposed budget that takes into account some of the feedback that we heard today. I encourage you to reach out to us, again, advocate for what you want to see in the budget and make sure it's reflective of your needs. Again, it's not an easy process. I will take the time to say that we do have to find other ways of bringing revenue not only to the school district, but to the state. I've made that comment to elected officials. The problem with budgets is there's only a finite number of dollars that's being spent, and year over year, we're fighting over the same dollars. So as an entity, again, as a city, district, as well as the state, we have to find new sources of revenue to help our students and help our communities. With that being said, I now call this meeting to an end, and have a good night. Thank you.